And welcome back to the Wellness Paradox podcast. I'm so grateful that you can join us on this journey towards greater human flourishing. As always, I'm your host, Michael Stack, an exercise physiologist by training and a health entrepreneur and a health educator by trade. And I'm fascinated by a phenomena I call the wellness paradox. This paradox, as I view it, is the trust, interaction, and communication gap between fitness professionals and our medical community. This podcast is all about closing off that gap by disseminating the latest, most evidence-based, and most engaging information in the health sciences. And to do that in episode 62, we're joined by Charlie Rowe. Charlie works for a company called Physicians Fitness, and they're an organization that specializes in working with individuals who have orthopedic and chronic pain issues that aren't resolved necessarily by traditional modalities, or, as we'll talk about during the podcast, people who are just looking to exercise and move safely and aren't sure how to do so. And the really exciting topic that we got into in the podcast was the idea of a very thorough musculoskeletal assessment. And that's actually the first time we've talked about this concept of musculoskeletal assessment here on the Wellness Paradox. And when you put it into the context of the population that Charlie and his team at Physicians Fitness are working with, people who are post-rehab, people who are dealing with chronic pain, I think you'll see very quickly how this conversation can inform working with a group of individuals that are kind of in this no man's land between physical therapy and the medical system, and then exercising safely and effectively on their own. So I think this is going to be a really unique and interesting conversation that will expose many of you listening to a topic that at least we haven't discussed before, and quite honestly is a topic that's not very broadly discussed in our industry. There will be a lot of great information and links to share after this episode. So to view those, please go to the show notes page. That's wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 62. Please enjoy this conversation with Charlie Rowe. Today, we're delighted to be joined by Charlie Rowe. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, pleasure to be with you.
So I'm excited to have this discussion around a lot of what happens in the business model that you work in, despite it being in Ohio. And as we were just talking beforehand, the good U of M, Ohio State rivalry here, but we're going to try to set that aside for a moment and talk about some very exciting things. But before we launch into that, just tell us a little bit more about your background to provide some context for our audience.
In sports, I was never the most talented technically, but because of my conditioning, I could hang with some of the better athletes. And there was just something that really fascinated me about being the most conditioned athlete. And so fast forward to college, I go to college, and whether I was working out at the gym on campus or off campus, people would come up to me and they'd start asking me questions about exercise. Like my senior year of college, it hits me. What if I could just make a living doing this? And so I had an uncle that was in business, and I thought, I was going to school for business. I thought that's what I was going to do. I was going to, follow in his footsteps and eventually take over the business. And he's like, look, you're not passionate about this. Yeah. You've been passionate about fitness. If you're passionate enough about it, you'll be able to make a living doing it. And so I took him up on that challenge, and I graduate from college, and I start just in Rochester, where I'm from. I just start calling up people and going to gyms and ask them if they have any advice for me how to get started, and end up going to Oak Hill Country Club. I don't know if you play golf or not, but Oak Hill's a very well-known country club there. Yeah. And met with the person that was running the fitness center at the time. His name was Bill Brackman, and he called me back and said, look, I don't need a personal trainer just yet, and you aren't one. He said, but this could be a good place for you to get started if you're interested. And I took him up on it. And Bill was a little bit more old school. He came from like the Nautilus, Arthur Jones era, and I credit him for opening my eyes to be open to selectorized machine equipment. We had at the time we had a Cybex Galileo line. I'm not sure if you ever had an opportunity to use any of that equipment, but it was nice. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
little older, but yeah, I'm familiar with it from the early part of my career. Yeah.
Yeah. So I enjoyed using that stuff. And I start, I become certified. I start with the Cooper Clinic certification, and then he encourages me to get the ACSM certification. I get the NSCA, the CSCS. But the thing I always struggle with, Michael, is that at that time I didn't really have any training as far as how do I help this person that has musculoskeletal issues, or how do I prevent them from getting worse by doing this exercise thing? Because often that happened quite a bit, and so that frustration led me to, I guess, go down the non-traditional route. One of the things I started with was muscle activation techniques, and I started with RTS, Tom Purvis's program, and those really served me well as far as opening my eyes. The MAT taught me well as far as advanced anatomy. Tom's, training opened my eyes to mechanics, which I didn't really have any training in. And at that time in Rochester, I was the only guy kind of doing these things and thinking this way. And I wanted a mentor. I was craving a mentor to help me. And so that's when Greg Mack here in Physicians Fitness, the owner of Physicians Fitness, was looking to bring someone in. And he and I connected, and I came here to Columbus. And as what I appreciate about Greg is that he's always forward thinking, he's always learning, he's always trying to grow. And so since that, we've just become more and more, we've moved away from the MAT, utilizing that. It served us well at one point, but we've just become more interested in using exercise.
Yeah.
And that's always what I wanted to do from the beginning anyways, was help people via exercise and do it in this gym type setting, if you will.
Right. Yeah. I love that story. And I love that history. Very, very similar for me. I got into weightlifting because it was something that interested me. And I'm grateful, just as I'm sure you are, to have been able to make it in my career. Not a lot of people have the opportunity to take their passion and always turn it into their career.
Yeah. I mean, there's something to be said, right? I love my job. I love waking up, going to it every day. I love to learn. There's so much to learn in our industry. You'll never get bored that way. And that's what I love about it. And I love interacting, with other folks like yourself. They're just passionate about it. Want to make this profession a true profession.
Exactly. Well, on that note, you mentioned it, Physicians Fitness. Talk a little bit more about this. This was originally what kind of intrigued me to talk to you, in addition to some of the things that you were posted on LinkedIn. Is this business model seems really interesting. So just what's the mission of the organization? Who does it serve? Just start broad, and then we can zoom in more.
Yeah, so I'll read for you. I don't have it memorized, but I'll read for you. The mission statement here is to help individuals achieve independence and freedom so that they can live a happy, satisfying, and pain-free life by building wellness together through fitness, education, exercise, and muscle joint injury prevention. So really what we're about is wherever someone is at, whether they're younger, they're older, they come to us with several orthopedic issues and diseases. We want to try and meet them where they are at, and we want to get them exercising. Now, some of the things that we might do initially with folks, to some of your listeners, it might not look like actual exercise.
Right.
I'm not handing them weights and telling them, all right, let's do 3 sets of 10 of these things, right? They just can't tolerate that.
Yep.
But our goal is always get them and keep them exercising.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there's such a need to serve that population. And I liked what you said so much there about, it's not just about handing them, a set of 15-pound dumbbells and go do, 3 sets of 10 to 15 reps and resting a minute between sets, because some people can tolerate that. Some people can't. And I want to get into a little bit of that later on when we get into some of the nuts and bolts of how you actually do your programming and prescription. But before we even get into that, I want to try to understand your business model a little bit more, because, this podcast, as well as many conversations in the industry right now, are all about how we bridge the gap between fitness and healthcare. And I mean, even the very name of your business model, it's, physicians fitness. So first, talk about the relationship that exists between your organization and physicians in the area. How are you getting referrals? How are you communicating back with them? What's that whole workflow look like for you?
Yeah. So, well, I'll tell you how the name came about. So Greg Mack, the owner, back in the early 90s, I think he told me it was like the second idea. It was like their second big summit. Yeah. And so he was an attendee, and one of the lectures that he attended, they were discussing how the consumers of exercise and working with exercise professionals, they wanted their exercise programming coordinated with their physicians.
Yeah.
Their medical. And he's like, wow, that makes sense to me. And okay, I'm going to name this company Physicians Fitness. And so, yeah, what we're adamant about is we want to try and coordinate our programming and care, exercise programming, however you want to say it, with other practitioners that are working and messing, if you will, with clients' physiology. Yeah. So whether it be a physician, whether it be a massage therapist, a chiropractor, if we feel that we need to, coordinate, we want to coordinate with them. And we'll even, COVID kind of put a little bit of damper on this at one point, but if it'll allow us to, our schedules allow us to, if they schedule an appointment with their doctor or they're going to see a physician, we'll go with them.
Oh.
And we don't charge them for that. But we'll just try and share with the practitioner or with the doctor, what we're seeing on our end. To your point, we'll also, if we can't attend, we tend to write up a narrative. This is when we met this person. This is what the initial assessment showed us. Here's a progress report. This is what I think's going on, and we'll send that with them so that they can take that to their doctor's appointment. And sometimes it's valued. Sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes they they kind of look at it and toss it to the side, unfortunately. But I think that's the other thing too. And again, what I appreciate about what you're doing is, like I said, I always, when I was at Oak Hill, I always wanted to be respected as a professional.
Yeah.
I want us to be a profession. I think, unfortunately, the exercise industry in general still kind of looked down upon.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that you said that I do want to go back to is that you're not just getting referrals from physicians. It sounds like across a wide variety of allied health professionals. So, I mean, assume that's, PT, OT, dietitians, you run the gamut. How do you develop those referral relationships with those allied health professionals? I mean, I assume many were existing when you came to Physicians Fitness, but you've also cultivated many over time. How do you go about doing that? Because I think that's something a lot of professionals would like to know how to do more effectively.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things was just if they were open to it, and the doctors are a little bit more of a challenge, but fitness instructors, personal trainers, if they were working with another client, I'd ask, can I meet them? Can I contact them? And then I'd say, I'm happy to come to you.
Yeah.
And no drive, especially for me in the beginning, no drive was too far for me to do that. I felt like I needed to do that. The other thing was just, like I mentioned before, just trying to send them narratives and progress reports, and just putting out there that, hey, we're working with this person. This is what we're finding. Any questions, feel free to contact us. And just try and keep it ongoing. I've found, unfortunately, like on LinkedIn with doctors, they might have a LinkedIn account, but they're not really active there. And I've tried to connect with some of them that way, or I'm like, oh, okay, I'm working with this person's patient. Let me see if I can contact them directly on LinkedIn. And unfortunately, I just don't get many responses that way.
Yeah. It is a challenge. What would you say right now is your most fruitful collaboration? Is there any one allied health provider that you seem to be collaborating with more than another, or is it pretty even?
I'd say it's pretty even. Yeah. And to be, perfectly transparent with you, I mean, the majority right now of the business I get are from other existing clients.
Yeah, right.
Word of mouth that way. But one of the other things too, that if we do have doctors' emails, we'll try and just send them maybe like a research article on exercise, promoting an exercise. So it's just kind of like, they get it, and we're just kind of like, top of mind, or we're just kind of putting it out there that we're here. And just like anything, you do it maybe 7 times. That 7th time, they're kind of like, yeah, maybe we need to refer this patient to these guys.
Yeah, I love that. I love how you're adding value first. You're building value by sending them resources rather than just, coming there with your hand out saying, hey, we want referrals. And I'm sure doctors get solicited for things all of the time. And so that approach is one that I've heard, other people use before as well. And it seems to be really productive. Now, talk to me, let's zoom in more. So we kind of talked a little bit about the referral process. Talk to me about your intake and your onboarding process. When I was researching your company, I said, this is decently extensive and very comprehensive. So I'm curious to understand the nuts and the bolts of that. And I think our audience would like to understand a little bit more about this as well.
Yeah, well, the first thing always, if anyone is interested, so whether they call me directly, or they send an inquiry via email, the first thing we always have to start with is, okay, let's talk on the phone, just to make sure, because everyone's time is important. Let's just make sure that it justifies an in-person visit.
Mm-hmm.
And then the first thing then is just to have a consultation. And that the more and more I do this, I find the consultation to be so important. And that's something that I guess I'm always trying to work on.
Yeah.
My interviewing skills and really trying to figure out, why exactly is this person here?
Yeah.
We feel that someone comes to us, right, because it's an emotional need, right? So if someone says, well, I gotta lose weight, well, why do you have to lose weight? I try and dig a little deeper, right? And then, try and get them to say, well, I have my high school reunion coming up and I'm embarrassed. I've let myself go. Or I need to resolve my knee pain because it's preventing me from running. I can't run. And because I can't run, I'm feeling older than I should. I don't like that feeling. So I'm always trying to, we start with the consultation, which is complimentary, by the way, right? Because if it's not a fit, then it shouldn't cost anyone money, right? To go, okay, yeah, this isn't the right place for you. So I think the consultation's huge.
Yeah.
And then from there, if we do feel like, okay, this is the right fit, or at least, let's at least start with an assessment to see what we have here. Then we start with an assessment. An assessment, as you said, yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. We start with just looking at heart rate, blood pressure, just making sure that's intact, that there's no red flags there. We'll look at girth measurements. We'll look at posture, range of motion,
Mm-hmm.
a range of motion exam, and we'll do what we call a qualitative manual assessment of motor control. So rather than what MAT taught us, and I believe applied kinesiology teaches, is you're actually testing individual muscles.
Yeah.
We just don't believe that you can do that you can actually isolate a muscle, and then let alone that it's a quantitative thing. It's more of a qualitative thing. It's a thing. It's an experience between me and the client. And I was trying to explain that I'm going to push on your muscles here and see if you can react. If you like it, if I like it, I'll tell you that I like it and that felt good to me. And then if I don't like it, I'll tell you I don't like it, and then I'll ask you what you think of that. So it's an experience between the client and the practitioner. So then from there, then we after we do that, and it takes about 90 minutes usually for me to do that.
Mhm.
I tell them I'm just gonna send you home. We'll come back. We'll sit down, and I'll show you what I found as it pertains to what we've collected and what I think what we need to work on. And I show them that, and then we get started. We start with our first official session, and we'll kind of take it from there. But I think it's helpful for a client to see, okay, what's this timeline look like if everything goes well, right? Obviously, life can happen, things can happen, other injuries happen. You come across a landmine that you might not have come across from the initial assessment.
So I'm curious to go back to your I think you called it like qualitative muscle testing. So just maybe give us a little bit of a deeper dive on that. I'm familiar with MAT and applied kinesiology, and I completely agree with you with those techniques, particularly in applied kinesiology, is that it is a very subjective and qualitative form of evaluation. So I've always struggled with it as well. So how exactly, I mean, to the extent you could explain this, over a podcast, how exactly do you go about your muscle testing? So just zoom in a little bit there more, because I think our listeners would find that interesting.
Yeah, I'll try and do it the best I can. Is I'm looking at a certain group of muscles and at a certain joint angle. And I'm pushing on them. Now again, it kind of varies obviously from client to client, right? Looking at you, I think I could push pretty hard. You look in shape to me, right? You exercise your shape. I'm going to push on you. That's going to be different than the 86-year-old, woman that I'm working with. But it's just enough that can they react to the force that I'm applying to their body?
Yep.
And if I get some displacement, I move them, then I'm saying that's low quality stability. They can't react to that. If they can, then I'm moving on to looking at some other different positions. But I think the value in that I saw, that I think MAT presented with that, was you could find parts of the body where there was a lack of motor control.
Right. Now, when you're doing that assessment, it sounds like there's a communication that exists with the client or the patient where, you are assessing it, but it sounded like you also said you're asking them how it feels for them as well, which is not always the case in that type of testing.
No, and I'll tell you, Michael, back in the day, just doing this, there would be times where I someone would say that didn't feel very good. And I'd say, well, felt good to me, strong.
Yeah.
Kind of like, being totally dismissive, not even realizing it.
Yeah.
I look back, I'm like, gosh, man, because now when they say that, I say, oh, okay, let's try that a couple of times. Or it might be their way of saying that didn't feel good, but if I modify that test a little bit, maybe I just change the conditions a little bit, maybe I change the angle, how I'm pushing on it. You see, oh, wait a minute, they couldn't do it that way.
I'd like to take a quick break from today's episode to tell you more about one of our sponsors. As all of you are well aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has been absolutely devastating for the fitness industry, with upwards of 1/3 of our clubs closing nationally on a permanent basis. One of the few stabilizing forces during this very tumultuous period of time has been IHRSA, the Global Trade Association for the Health and Fitness Industry. On my crusade to make fitness professionals part of our healthcare continuum, the work that IHRSA is doing is absolutely vital. They provide advocacy and lobbying support at both the federal and the state level. They support state alliances in many ways, and they also provide resources and best practices to club owners, operators, and individual fitness professionals. Indeed, if we are truly going to become part of the healthcare continuum, we must speak with one unified voice. We must have best practices that we implement, and we must come together as an industry to ensure the public, the medical community, and lawmakers hear our message loud and clear that movement is medicine and it is essential. That is the work that IHRSA is doing. They've recently revamped their membership structure, allowing large clubs, small clubs, boutiques, and individual professionals to join the organization for an appropriate price that allows them to have access to all of these many great resources and allows us to unify and amplify our voice as an industry. For more information on the amazing work that IHRSA is doing, go to their website, IHRSA.org. That's IHRSA.org, IHRSA.org, to look in a little bit further into the work IHRSA is doing to unify our industry, to move us closer to being a part of that healthcare continuum. Now back to today's episode. Yeah. It's interesting. It's something that comes with years and years and years of experience. I think as you start to do it more, you get more comfortable with it. How do you allow that to drive your prescription? Now, I do want to get into some more general prescriptive principles, but since we're here right now, I just want to ask this question. I mean, let's say, I don't know, you're assessing somebody's hip abduction strength, and you find that they're weak bilaterally, which is you probably find is a fairly common thing. I know that's something I used to find. Like, sure. What does that inform from a prescriptive standpoint for you? Like, how do you think about that? You certainly don't say, okay, we're only going to focus on the hip abductors and nothing else. How do you work that into your program design?
Yeah. So, well, kind of going along those lines. Yeah. If I think that there might be something to that, I might say, well, so supine, they can't do it. Mm-hmm. What happens if I change the conditions and I put them prone, right? Because the conditions are different, right?
Yep.
And wait a minute, they can do that. Okay, maybe that's, to your point, maybe that might not be a problem,
right?
But if I see, wait, they can't do it prone, sideline, they're having issues, which obviously it makes sense too, because gravity is more of an issue, right? They can't do it standing either, right? We have a total gym set up so they can brace themselves on the total gym.
Yeah.
Test them that way. And like if we see that, I've tested 3 or 4 different configurations, as we call them, where their abduction qualitatively was not high quality. Let's see if we can start working with that a little bit. And take them through the different we refer to them as the different modes of contractions. So let's focus on concentric contractions, right? Contraction shortening, where I'll give them some resistance. Let's then just see how they do with an isometric contraction. And then how do they do? They do a voluntary eccentric contraction, right? So they're contracting, and I usually tell them, pretend like we're arm wrestling. You're going to keep tension on there. You're going to let me take you through that range. And then we do a series of those different contractions and then test and then find, you're stable, you're high quality. Then I might say, okay, why don't we go to the hip abduction machine, or let's teach you a way to do this at home. Right. Here, I'm going to give you this piece of tubing. I'll have you lie supine, and I'll have you wrap this around your ankles. Just have you focus on one leg at a time.
Yeah, I love that progression. And again, this is maybe hard for some of our listeners to completely visualize, over a podcast, but we'll link up in the show notes page some examples of what we're talking about. I think that'll be helpful for our audience. Let's now move into just kind of more broadly speaking, what you're seeing in your practice. I would venture to say that you are likely getting a higher proportion of your clients that come to you who have orthopedic issues, they have chronic pain. What are you seeing most commonly? And then the follow-up to that is, how are you approaching those things from a prescriptive standpoint with these individuals that are coming through your door?
Yeah. So, I guess the typical person that comes to us is someone that has some sort of physical sensation or pain that they don't like. And usually how they get to us is because they've tried other modalities, if you will, and they've had limited or no success. Now, in saying that, I do not want that to come across that I'm putting those things down. It's just for these clients and their unique situation, they weren't getting what they're looking for.
Yeah.
But it just like, maybe if it's helpful just to give you some ideas of who these people exactly are. They can be young athletes that they have an injury and they're looking for relief. Yeah. We get a couple young athletes. They're probably the smaller part of our clientele. Athletes are athletes. If they're feeling good, they just want to play sports.
Yeah, right.
And I don't blame them for that. But one person that comes to mind that I worked with this past year, early 30s, a mother, has a history of gymnastics, history of all sorts of, competed at a very high level. Yeah. But unfortunately, a history of all sorts of traumas. I mean, you name it, it sounded like she had it.
That's gymnastics will do that to you, won't it?
Right? Yeah. And so now here she is in her early to mid 30s. A mom, she's the breadwinner. She works from home. And she's put on some weight that she's not happy about, and she's doesn't like how she feels.
Yeah.
And one of the things that she told her physician was, I'd really like to work on just being able to exercise. I'd love to hire some sort of trainer that could help me exercise, because I have these injuries, and I'm, often what we get is, right, and you might hear this too, I want to exercise, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm afraid I'm going to get hurt. Another one, I'm just started working with a woman who's mid to late 50s, just had back in October of 2021, spinal fusion, L1 to S1. It's telling me she's having trouble walking. She can't walk for long periods, can't stand for long periods, is put on weight. Again, I want to exercise. I don't know what to do. So those are kind of some examples, if that helps you kind of get an idea of who's coming to see us. And then another example is a gentleman that I've worked with close to about a year now. He had a history of a spinal injury years ago, and as a result of that, unfortunately, he has no dorsiflexion, no plantar flexion, has to walk on crutches, did physical therapy, finished the physical therapy, asked, I want to keep going. I need to keep doing something. He told me during his initial consultation that his wife has serious health issues and she's worse off than he is. And, he wants to exercise. He wants to get better. He can't afford losing any strength.
Yeah. So it seems like a lot of the people that are coming to you and I think this is very common in the population broadly, a lot of people want to exercise, but they don't know how. And they're also afraid that instead of making things better, it's going to make things worse, particularly when they have orthopedic issues, and you're kind of, shepherding them through that process. How do you approach that? So we can use the woman who had the spinal fusion, or this gentleman who, lacked the neurological function to dorsi and plantar flex. I mean, I teach a college class on exercise testing and prescription. There's not a chapter in the book on how you work with, either one of those clients. And even the research that's out there, it's kind of scant and it's never very specific from a protocol standpoint. How do you go about approaching that so you actually allow these people to see improvements?
Yeah, so it's probably to go into full details. That's probably another conversation.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. You don't have to
but to give you kind of like a broad thing. Yeah. The way the assessment really helps me with that, because the assessment gives me an idea as far as where this person currently is and what they currently can do. And what amazes me is that there are people that come to us and during the consultation that think, this sounds pretty straightforward. But then you do the assessment and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe, some people don't like being vulnerable. Maybe this person wasn't really upfront with what was going on. And then there's other situations where you think, man, this is really going to be bad. And you assess them and you're like, man, this is better than I thought. And and if that is always the case, I always want to be encouraging.
Yeah.
Right. And just, hey, it's going to be a process.
Yeah.
Which I don't think in today's world with, instant gratification and how you can attain things instantly, it's not very popular. But if they can hang in there, really you can get some great things accomplished. But really, I would tell you that the assessment really helps me kind of get an idea of where to start. So like with for example, the woman that has a spinal fusion, I had to modify the assessment a little bit because she was uncomfortable lying supine on the table. So I had to put a little wedge underneath her legs. Mm-hmm. And as I was going, I was explaining to her that, you know what, I think where we're going to have to start is your lower leg, right? From your knee down. I feel comfortable working with those areas. There's lesser degree of freedom at the ankle and the knee than there is obviously at the spine and the hips. And then one thing that we'll look at is, what is this person? We try to figure out based on the data that we're collecting and the information that they're collecting from the questionnaire that we give them. Where do they stand, on the spectrum? Like as far as, for lack of better terms, low functioning to high function.
Right.
And explain to them when they come back for that second part, hey, look, the body's only going to let me intervene where you are currently at. Yeah. If I try and exceed it, your body's not going to like it. You're going to walk out the door feeling worse than when you came in. So, I want you to, I always tell them, I want you to leave with no change, or at least a change for the better. Right. I don't want you walking out the door feeling worse than when you came in. And admittedly, historically, I was guilty of doing that. And before I learned Greg's, intake process here. And then there was a time where all of a sudden I became the opposite. It was almost like I was too cautious, right? Too conservative. Well, then now the client's not getting, they're not making any progress, and we both become frustrated. Yeah.
How do you think about progression? I think I understand the critical role that the assessment plays, but I tend to find that most fitness professionals, if they do a relatively robust assessment, they can figure out a good starting point. Okay, I can do that. I probably shouldn't do that. The challenge that I tend to see most fitness professionals face is, how do I progress this person in a way, to your point a moment ago, that allows them to see improvement, but also doesn't cause them to walk out the door feeling worse? That's a very fine line to walk, particularly with people who have more significant orthopedic issues.
I think what's helped me the most with that, Michael, is just learning and trying to apply mechanics, and just looking at the things of, well, what's the torque in this scenario versus this other scenario, and what's the smallest little step I can take to go from this scenario to that scenario. So, knowing, things of applying those things, progressing from doing the exercise this way to this way. And I think there's been people that showed great progressions. One person that stands out to me early on in my career was Juan Carlos Santana, who kind of showed in seminars and his videos, like, well, this is how you could do this with grandma. Right. This is how you could do this with your everyday person, and this is how you could do it with your advanced athlete. And I could see that, and it would make sense to me, but I never mechanically, I just couldn't understand that or wrap my head around that.
Right. Yeah. What you said about, what's kind of the smallest increment possible, I think that's such an important point. I've often used an analogy that exercise is like cooking. You can always add, but you can never take away after you've done too much. And I think that's what speaks to the incremental nature of it.
Yeah, I always tell folks too, one of my favorite movies from back in the day was Training Day.
Ah,
Denzel Washington
yeah.
and Ethan Hawke. And, there's that one scene where Denzel double crosses his buddy,
Yeah.
and Ethan Hawke is calling him out on it. He's really upset with him. And Denzel says, "This is chess. It ain't checkers." And that's how I feel exercise really is. Yeah. And it should be. Unfortunately, I think, historically, I was guilty of checkers. I was guilty of wanted to make it fun.
Right.
And I think that, but I was more, it was about choreography with me. It wasn't about progression or even periodization. Those things just kind of, I don't know, for the beginning of my career, they kind of went out the window.
Yeah, I do want to dive so much deeper on so many things, but we're not going to have enough time. So maybe in a year from now, we'll bring you back on and dive deeper on some stuff. But before I get to the final couple of questions, I think the last really formal question I want to end on is, where do you go to learn? Like, where are your educational sources and resources that you go to? Because I hear you doing a decently highly specialized thing. You're doing it at a high level, and the resources for good education in our industry can be scant. So where are you going, and where would you direct fitness professionals to go if they want to learn some of the things that you're talking about?
Yeah. So about, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, Greg Mack here decided to form his own education company.
Okay.
It's called Exercise Pro Ed. So I will tell you, Michael, that if I don't believe I would still be in this industry if I did not have Greg's guidance, for whatever that is worth to folks. And I think he has a great program. RTS was a great program for me early on in my career as far as learning mechanics and things. Currently, right now, as I do CECs and things of that nature, I've gotten into actually a lot of the NSCA's, some of their stuff from Human Kinetics, right? Their online courses or their at home courses. I like those things too, because I think the other thing too is I'm sure I've been guilty of this, is you kind of stray away from the basics.
Yeah.
But the basics are always there. They're the foundation of everything. And if you don't really have that, that's where advanced thought actually comes from.
Yeah, it's so true. I think sometimes we get bored with the basics, but whenever I have strayed too far, and then I bring it back to the basics, I'm like, oh, this is why this always works so well, because those fundamental principles that we learned about, I think of the, Fleck and Kramer Designing Resistance Training textbook or something like that, like the most basic of the basic. That is a great point. And we'll link up to some of these resources on the show notes page, just so people can have access to them. I mean, we've thrown around a bunch of acronyms during this. Our industry is great for acronym soup. So we'll make sure that people could actually trace those acronyms to websites to find out more info. Charlie, where could people go if they want to find out, first, more about you, and then second, more about Physicians Fitness?
Yeah. First, more about me. I would say go to the Physicians Fitness website. You can contact me that way directly. Facebook, I try and post things on Facebook. LinkedIn is probably even a better way if you're not local here. It's an easy way to connect with me. I try and be on there weekly. That's how you and I connect.
Yeah, I was going to say I can attest. Charlie posts good stuff, and after watching his stuff for a while, I said, wow, this would be a great guy to have on the podcast. So yes, he's definitely a great resource if you're looking for some solid education in this realm.
And then, Physicians Fitness, I would say go to the physician website, and there should be a way to contact us directly.
Awesome. And I will link up to all of that on the show notes page, so people have the opportunity to check it out. And I would encourage you to make sure you connect with Charlie on LinkedIn. As I said, he posts a lot of good stuff. I'm finding nowadays I'm getting my most contemporary research from very bright people like you that I'm following through a bunch of different social media platforms. I used to have to subscribe to journals and journal article reviews. Now I just wait for guys like you, smart guys like you, to do the work. And then I just read the things that you guys post. So on behalf of all of us that are doing that out there, I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
So last question, and it's the question I always end the podcast on. And I consider the wellness paradox to be the trust, communication, and interaction gap that exists between fitness professionals and medical professionals. Now, you've been bridging this gap for a lot of your career. If you could somehow distill your advice down into one little nugget you can give to our audience as to how they could work to bridge that gap, what would it be?
Well, I think it starts with a client, in the sense of, showing that client that you care about them, show that you're listening to them. You might disagree with some things, but you don't want to be dismissive.
Yeah.
Show to the client that, hey, if I can go with you to an appointment, I'll go with you to the appointment. And then just try and find these people, these other practitioners that want to get in that sandbox with you and they want to play with you. That they see the value in that. I think coordinated care is I think it's frustrating when someone goes to practitioner and they're going around like a hot potato.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest challenge right now with that consumers face.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlie Rowe, thank you so much for joining us on the Wellness Paradox.
My pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Charlie as much as I did. If you found it insightful and informative, please share with your friends and colleagues. Those shares make a big difference for us. Any information we'd like to share with you can be found on the show notes page by going to wellnessparadoxpod.com/episode 62. Please be on the lookout for next week's episode when it drops on Wednesday. And don't forget to subscribe through your favorite podcast platform. Until we chat again next week, please be well.